Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you all are doing fine. So today's topic is about high level design, and we are going to talk about like what can be the roadmap for your interview preparation for your high level design interviews. So yeah, that's the topic for today. And the high level agenda that we're going to cover is like we'll talk about what are system design interviews, then we'll also understand what are actually high level design interviews. Then we'll try to understand about what are the roles what are the goals of high level design interviews, what are the expectations from it, how can you prepare for it, what are things you should prepare, what should be your step by step approach for preparing for high level system design interviews. And then we'll also talk about like once you are in the interview, what should be your step by step approach to come up with a design during an interview, right? So that's like the agenda for today. So yeah, without wasting much time, let's start and directly go into the actual content. So very first thing that I want to discuss is what is a system design interview. So in such kind of interviews, you are actually given a real world problem, okay, and in that problem you are expected to come up with a design for it. So the idea is like any real world problem that you can think about that exists out there, like design Uber, design Ola. I'll tell you more example problems later in the section, but any system that's out there that is working fine, that can be given to you, and you are expected to come up with a design for it. We'll discuss more what exactly do we mean when we say design for it. But yeah, that's the high level understanding of a system design interview. Now the point is every system has some requirements and it behaves different for different requirements, right? So that's why no system in the world is perfect, and that's why you are expected to come up with the trade-offs. The design that you have come up with, what are the trade-offs with respect to the requirements. That's another thing that you are required to understand or to come up with in your system design interviews. I mean, it's more about pros and cons. Where will your design work well, where will your design does not work well. These are some of the things which you need to come up during your interview of your system design. Yeah, so these are, I would say, this is majorly at very high level about system design interviews. Now, system design interviews are of two types. One is low level design, second is high level design. Low level design, I have already created a separate video. I'll put the link of that video in the description of this video. This video today, we are going to focus more on high level design interviews. So in the next section, let's try to understand what actually are high level design interviews, right? So as the name suggests, right, there's a word high level in this. So that's why it means like we are going to design a system at high level. What does that mean? It means we are going to talk about what all services will you create, what will be the architecture of the services or of the whole system that you will be coming up with. So majorly things like how will you structure different services, like what all different components will you create, how will you decide what storage layer to use, which database to use, and why you're making a particular choice, right? So these all things are being discussed at a high level, in a high level design interview. So various components, like Kafka, Redis, what all different caching strategies would you use. So idea is like whatever you are going to use in the technology level or at the architecture level, that's what you're going to discuss in your high level design interview. Now the goal is whether the candidate is able to come up with a scalable and highly available system or not, right? These are the two major criterias which are evaluated during your high level design interview. The design that you come up with, right, that has to be scalable and that has to be highly available. What do you mean by scalable? Scalability means if the number of users grow, right? Let's say today you are designing a system for 1,000 users, right? Tomorrow, let's say the number of users increase to maybe 1 lakh users or 100,000 users, right? So your current system that you have designed, how will it behave? Will it work as is, just by including more number of nodes, or will it fail to work at this new scale and you will have to redesign, right? So that's what is we mean by scalability. So the design that you come up with in your high level design interview is judged upon one of the parameter, which is called scalability. Like if the number of users grow, how will your design scale? That's one factor. Second factor, which is again very important, is highly available. Availability means if you make a request to a service, right, then you get a response back. Nobody in the world would like to create a service or would like to create a system which is not available for the users, right? Let's say if we talk about Amazon, right? Amazon, or I mean, for that matter, any service, maybe Ola, Uber, Amazon, any service that you build. If let's say you open the website and it says service is not available, then that's not a good experience, right? And no company would like to build such kind of a service, and that's why this is one of the most another important thing which is being evaluated in your design, whether the system that you have created is highly available or not. Will it, if some part of the system goes down, if some service goes down, will your whole system becomes unavailable? Will your system be still able to serve requests of the users if a part of the system is down, right? So that's what high availability means. And that's the major two criteria, scalability and high availability, which are the goal of evaluation of a system design interview. Now, what are the expectations, right? I mean, the goal is to have scalability and high availability, but there are more expectations in terms of what you are required to come up with in a high level design interview. The first thing is requirements, right? Whenever a system is given to you, you should be able to come up with the requirements. Again, we'll touch upon these things once we discuss the how you're going to perform in a actual interview, step by step approach that you're going to take. I'll discuss more about them during that section, but at high level expectations is you should be able to come up with good requirements. You should be able to identify the core components, what all services you will be creating, what all databases, different components, Kafka, caches, whatever components you're going to use. Are you able to come up with those components or not, right? And then how the components will behave with each other, so you have to define the interactions between them, right? And then definitely the design considerations, like if is your system fault tolerance, is it highly available, it is scalable, right? These are some of the expectations that you have generally from your high level design interview. More details on system design interviews in general, I have put in a different video which just talks about what a different kind of system design interviews are. And as I said, for a low-level design interview, I have created a separate video for a roadmap of a low-level design interview. I'll put the link of both the videos in the description, so you can just go over them if you want to. Now, the next section, coming to the example problems, right? So as I said, like, it can be any real system. So you can have Book My Show, Instagram, URL short. Now I just put some random names. The beauty of system design interviews is, like, any system that you have out there in the world, you can just pick it, and that can be one of the problem in your interview. So the problems are actually infinite. Even if the system is not out there, if you have a real world problem that you're going to solve, right, then that can be a system design interview problem. So any problem can be given to you. The idea is, the focus is scalability and availability. If the design that you have created, does it have any single point of failure? Will it be able to scale? It should be highly available. These are the things that are discussed in your system design interview. Okay, now coming to the most important topic, which is the learning strategy for high level design interviews, right? So what I have seen from the experience, right, I've been taking a lot of interviews of people. I have been mentoring also a lot of people. What I see, one of the major gap which people have is they just go to YouTube, watch some videos of example problems, maybe design tiny URL, design Netflix, design Uber, design messaging application like WhatsApp or Slack, and they just directly come to the interviews, right? So they do not understand the underlying concepts, in-depth concepts, like what goes behind those systems, right? How those systems behave at scale. They just know, okay, if I'm going to design a notification service, I'll just put a Kafka at the ingestion layer. But why Kafka? Or why something like a queue at the ingestion layer, right? That's one of the most important thing that is being discussed in your interviews, like the whys part of it, right? And that's why understanding the in-depth concepts is really important. That's why the first step that I have put in my roadmap is that you should learn the concepts first, right? And the two major concepts that we have is to achieve scalability and availability, right? Because that's what we are going to focus on in our interviews. So to achieve scalability, right, the general concepts or the major concepts that we use is partitioning. So there are two kinds of systems in the world, right? One is stateless systems, another one is stateful systems. Stateless systems are fairly easy to scale. You just put a load balancer in front of the services and they are able to fairly scale. But stateful systems are really complicated to scale, and that's where the whole logic goes in, and that's where majorly the partitioning and sharding play a very major role. So one important thing that you need to learn to achieve scalability is partitioning and sharding, right? Like how they work behind the scenes, what are different nuances, how to implement them. There are a lot of things when you start learning about these this concept, what is hot partitioning, what is your hot partitions, what is a partition key, how do you balance or distribute data among different servers, what is consistent hashing. So there are a lot of concepts that you will get to know once you understand partitioning or sharding in detail, conceptually. The second point is availability, because again we want to achieve high availability in the system, so we have to understand how availability works, right? And availability in general is achieved through replication. So through replication, though scalability or putting a load balancer in front of it also gives you some kind of availability, but again for a stateful system you do replication, and again with replication there are a lot of other concepts also, like quorums, leader election, there are a lot of different concepts that you have in replication also. So that's what also you need to learn. So the two things which are very important is scalability and availability, and for both of them there are very important concepts called partitioning and sharding and replication that you need to really understand in detail. And one of the very good resource for these two things is a book called Designing Data Intensive Applications. For both of the topics, this book has dedicated chapters. You can go through them and you will get a very good idea. So the very first step is that you should learn the in-depth concepts for achieving scalability and availability by learning partitioning and replication. Now that's the first step that you do, right? The second step that you have to do is there are various I would say practical systems there in the world which are already working at scale and which are already highly available, right? These systems are like Kafka, MongoDB, DynamoDB, Cassandra, Redis. So these are all nothing but they are systems, right? You can actually go through the designs of those systems and understand how they are designed, right? So the next step should be you should pick each of these systems. Maybe one database you can learn, okay, what database how database works behind the scenes, how MongoDB works. Similarly you can pick Kafka, how Kafka works, what are different concepts it implements. Similarly how Redis scales and all those things. And what you will realize actually is all of these systems, they are not doing anything but just implementing the partitioning and replication in one way or the other. Just because these are different systems, there are different implementations, and that's why each implementation will vary a little bit, right? But conceptually what you will see, every system is actually implementing partitioning and replication out of the box, behind the scenes. And that will give you a very good insight, like if you have to design your own system, then how can you also use these concepts, right? That's one benefit you will get. Second benefit that you will get is because these are very standard systems, so any design that you will create, majorly you will be using one of these technologies or some of these technologies, right? Like if I'm building, let's say, a messaging service, right? Messaging as in like WhatsApp or something, then maybe I'll be using a Kafka to queue messages. I'll be using a database or something like HBase or something, which is a NoSQL DB for storing my messages. Or if I'm using some groups or something, maybe I'm using DynamoDB or MongoDB for storing the user profiles or something. So the idea is you are going to use some of these technologies in your design. So once you understand these technologies in depth and how they work behind the scenes, you will be able to explain way better in your designs also. If interviewers cross question, like if they ask you how Kafka works, tell me in detail about Kafka, so you have already learned about it, right? So that will give you a very good idea. So second step should be pick up some standard systems. They are all open source, you can go through their documentation online. Kafka, MongoDB, they all have their documentations. Go through them and understand how they work and what benefits they give, what are the pros and cons, what are the general usage patterns, what are the different use cases where each of these systems should be used. And that way you will get a very good idea about standard components and how these concepts are also applied to these standard components. After you have done this, right, then the third step is to practice by yourself, right? Now take some sample problems, maybe design Netflix, design WhatsApp, design Slack, design whatnot, TinyURL, any system that you want to do. Practice by yourself. Don't directly watch some videos. Practice by yourself and then watch a video, and try to see where you are doing better and where that person in the video is doing better. It will never be like the person in the video is always doing the best thing. There will always be some pros and cons in the design of the YouTube videos person, in the YouTube videos design, and some pros and cons in your design, and you have to compare both of them and then maybe pick the best of both the worlds, right? That's one of the way to do practice. Second way could be you can figure out some friend of yours who is also maybe preparing for the interviews, and you can ask them, would you like to discuss a problem with me? And you can go to them and maybe you can collaboratively come up with a solution and then discuss the pros and cons of it, because that's what you will be doing in the interviews also, right? Like once you're in the interview, you will be discussing the solution with your interviewer. So it's like more like a discussion. So the same discussion you can have with your peers, you can have with your friends or anyone in your network, right? The third thing could be, you can have mock interviews. There are a lot of platforms like Engine Bogie, where you can find multiple experts and all, and you can actually do some mock interviews over there. So there are multiple ways to actually practice. The idea is, before reaching the practice layer, first of all, learn the concepts and then learn the standard components and then only practice. If you directly jump to the practice, maybe you can, figure out, okay, in a specific design, you have to use this, but you will not be understanding the whats and whys and hows of it, right? And without understanding them, coming up with a, good design in an interview, or for that matter, and even in your company, if you are doing a design of a problem, it will be very difficult, right? So first understand the concepts and then only practice. I hope the learning strategy is clear now. If you have any doubts in the learning strategy, please put them in the comments. I'll try to answer later on. So that's about the learning strategy I had. Now coming to the most important step, which is important section, which is actually, if you are in an interview, how to perform in that, right? What should be your standard steps? So the first thing that you will do that you will have in your interview will come up, and they will give you a problem, right? So the first step should be, you have to come up with the functional and non-functional requirements. Okay, that's the very first step that everyone should do. I have again seen a lot of people directly jumping onto the design without discussing the functional and non-functional requirements with the interviewer, which is again not a very good way, because if you do not know what you're going to build, then you will not be able to come up with a correct design, right? No design is perfect, as I said in the beginning. Every design is good or bad as per the requirements. So the very first step that you should do is gather requirements, discuss them with the interviewer, scope them, clarify with the interviewer, what you're going to include in the design, what you're not going to include in the design, in scope and out of scope, both the things you should clarify clearly with the interviewer. Never assume anything. Never think that, okay, this is very straightforward thing. Interviewer would already be knowing that this requirement will not be there or this requirement will be there. Never assume something like this. Always ask the interviewer, do you want this or do you not want this? Let's say maybe you're designing a tiny URL, right? Then maybe ask the interviewer, okay, will I have history of URLs also, right? Will I be creating only get or fetch or create or fetch only, right? So discuss them with your interviewer, like what they actually want in terms of functional requirements. Similarly, in terms of non-functional requirements, clarify right in the beginning, like how many customers I would have, how many URLs will be generated, what will be the expected load. Sometimes interviewers ask you to yourself estimate it or come up with some practical numbers, then think about them. I mean, don't say impractical numbers. Let's say if you're designing a tiny URL, don't say ki only 1 user per day will come or 100 users per day will come, right? Maybe you should come up with maybe 1 million users per day, which is a very normal number, right? So come up with some practical numbers if your interviewer is not providing you. Otherwise, you can ask your interviewer and they can give you some estimation on non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements should also cover some nuances, right? Like maybe if you are building some system which can be eventually consistent, right? Then you can definitely state right in the beginning, I'll be going ahead with eventual consistent system because I don't need strong consistency. Maybe what will be the latency of write and read. So there are some other non-functional requirements which will be important for the design that you are creating or for the problem that you are solving. Think about them and discuss them with your interviewer. Again, don't assume anything, always clarify. Overall process of functional and non-functional requirements, try to finish it up 10-15 minutes. Don't take up too much time onto it. Again, I have seen some people in the past who have spent maybe 25 minutes to 30 minutes just on the requirements. The problem over there is, you are not left with much time for the actual design, right? Generally in the interview, you will have 45 to 50 minutes for the design. And if you finish 25 to 30 minutes just for the requirements, then the rest of the time is very less for the actual design, right? So try to cover up the requirements a little quickly. I would not say in a minute or so, but maybe 8-10 minutes is a good time, right? So that's the first step. Come up with the use cases, come up with the requirements. Don't assume. Clarify assumptions. How many users are going to use it. What will the system do? Will it do this? Will it do that? Everything you should clarify. That should be the first step. The second step is you should come up with a high-level design, okay? And when I say high-level design, it's like a high-level component architecture. Like what will be the different components that you will have in the system? What will be the different services that you will have? What will be the different technologies that you would use? So, for example, if let's say you are doing a tiny URL solution, right? Maybe you can say I'll have a load balancers. I'll have application servers. I'll have cache servers. Again, don't think that this is the right design. I have just copied some design from internet and pasted it here just to give you an idea of it. Like the point I'm trying to make is try to create high level architecture of the whole system, that okay, these components I'll have cache, I'll have load balancers, I'll have a key generation service, I'll have some database, I'll maybe have some cleanup service to keep cleaning my DB. So the idea is like all the components that you're going to have in the system, try to lay them out on some draw.io or something, and create those components and put them here. Then at the same time try to create an interaction between them. Okay, what all components will interact with each other and how that interaction would work. So for example, here we are saying cleanup service will call database service, database will call cache, or maybe cache will read from database. Similarly, application service will call another load balancer. This load balancer will call application server, client will call load balancer. So try to come up with a whole interaction between each of the component that you create. Now the third step that you need to do, right, there will be some components which will be very straightforward or standard. Like in this design, if you see load balancers, these are very standard components, right? But as per the problem, you will have some core components. So core components for a, let's say, tiny URL design could be key generation service. Like how will you generate a key? That's a very important thing. Like how will you generate a URL, right? So think about the core components and then discuss their design. Okay, so for example, if I'm talking about again the key generation service, then what kind of an hashing algorithm I will use to generate the URL, how will I handle the collisions, where will I store my data, where will I store my URLs in a SQL or a NoSQL, how will I clean up them, what will be my schema. So all of these things which are very much core to the problem that you're going to solve, discuss them in depth. Okay, don't go into the depth of random things, because again you have a limited time in the interview and you don't want your time to be wasted in discussing things which are not relevant. Always discuss things which are important. So don't divert yourself from the core problem. Stick to the problem and only discuss the core components first. Maybe after discussing core components, if you still have time and if your interviewer wants, then you can discuss and touch upon other components. But the major thing that you want to do is first discuss the core components depending on the problem. Maybe if you're a messaging service, how will you do actually sending of messages, fan out of messages. So every problem will have some core areas, and you have to discuss the design of those core areas. The last thing that you want to do is discuss the scale and the availability, right? How will your system scale up, or how does your system support high availability? The two things that we discussed right in the beginning. You have to identify if there are any bottlenecks that are there in your design, if there are any constraints that you are able to see in your design. Is the system really scalable the way you have designed it, right? Is the system really highly available the way you have designed it, right? So think about all of these things and see if anything can be improved. If you need a load balancer somewhere, right? If you need maybe sharding somewhere, if you need maybe a caching somewhere to improve your read calls or something. So the point is, after doing the design, try to think about the scalability and availability aspects of it, because that's what is really, really important from your interviewer's point of view. They are actually looking for a design which is scalable and highly available, and you should be able to answer all the whys of it, right? So that's the fourth step, and that's the final step also, mostly, unless your interviewer wants to discuss something different. Sometimes interviewers also wants to tell you about operational efficiency or monitoring and how will you implement those kind of things, but not every interviewer goes into that. So again, repeating the 4 steps. The first step is coming up with the requirements, then coming up with a high level design, then pick up the core component of the design and discuss them in detail, and then talk about various aspects, various bottlenecks, scalability, availability, fault tolerance, and a lot of things that you have in the design that you have created. So these are the 4 steps majorly that you will do during an interview. And yeah, I think that also leads me to the end of the video. This is all I wanted to cover in the roadmap of high level design interviews. I hope you all liked the video. I also hope that whatever I told helped you for your preparation, or will help you for your preparation. If it really helps, please do put it in the comments. It will encourage me for creating more videos. And yeah, if you have any other feedback also, feel free to put that also in the comments. If you really like it, please like and share the video, and also please subscribe to the channel. Till my next video, bye bye, and good luck for your interviews.